God's Omniverse, an alternative to Darwinian evolution. Let me introduce myself. I am the digital clone of Dr. R.C. Metcalf. While my on-screen persona is generated by artificial intelligence, the words spoken by Dr. Metcalf's digital clones are always the words of Dr. Metcalf himself. He doesn't rely upon AI to create any content. He will occasionally refer to Grok, but will always credit Grok when appropriate. You can just call me RC. Most of what follows in this video will be the real Dr. Metcalf, but I will appear more frequently as this video series progresses. I will occasionally be joined by a second, younger clone of myself, derived from a photo taken 18 years ago. Here he is.
Hi guys, I'm also RC, or at least I was RC a while ago, but I will fill in for the OG from time to time. But for now, turn your attention to the real Dr. RC Metcalf.
In order to comprehend God's Omniverse, we first need to come to a deeper understanding of God himself. Due to the explosion of scientific knowledge across our world, those of us who desire to know the truth about reality need to admit that God does play a role in scientific thinking. Unfortunately, the loudest voices in today's scientific community have a priori excluded God. From the first time I allowed God the opportunity to reveal himself to me, everything I've learned in my undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate studies of the hard sciences, biology, chemistry, and physics, has been processed differently. Rather than considering how to explain physical processes without God, I have always asked myself, how and why would a very real God use this process for his purposes? The more I've learned, the more clearly God has revealed himself to me. I recall a talk given by Dr. Gary Habermas many years ago. I don't recall the details of Gary's talk, but I do remember the title, The Hiddenness of God. God does seem hidden to many of us, but I also recall the words of Jeremiah 29:13, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." And the proverb 8:17, "I love those who love me, and those who seek me diligently find me." God is omnipresent. His omnipresence includes his immanence and his transcendence. For the first time in millennia, we can understand what this means scientifically. But in order to do so, we need to be able to consider scale. On the screen, I've merged two slides from Harvard University physicist Dr. Lisa Randall. You can see the human at the bottom of the large-scale slide and at the top of the small-scale slide. My focus will be the cosmological scale on the one hand and the quantum scale on the other, the very large and the very small. But we'll start with the quantum scale, the very small. In 2012, the scientific world was overjoyed at the discovery of the Higgs boson, dubbed by some the God particle. What physicists were primarily excited about wasn't the Higgs particle itself, but the fact that its existence verified the existence of the Higgs field, a scalar field that permeates literally everything that exists, even in the apparent vacuum of deep space. This field provides the mass for all other subatomic particles, so it is the framework or substructure for everything God has created.
Unable to fully explain how these subatomic particles gained mass. This is where the Higgs field comes in. It is a field of energy that exists throughout all of space, and it is composed of Higgs bosons, which are elementary particles. All subatomic particles pass through and interact with the Higgs field. Some of these particles, like photons, whiz through and barely interact with it, resulting in very small mass. Other particles, like quarks, drag through and interact with the field a lot, which results in a larger mass. With this, the Higgs boson is able to successfully fill in the hole in the standard model.
What we saw when we discovered the Higgs boson was the smallest, most fundamental particle in God's creation. But what piqued my interest most was not the Higgs boson itself, but the medium within which it operates. I glanced at the fish swimming in my aquarium and easily recognized that the medium within which they exist is water. They were designed to live in water. I recalled the words Luke wrote in Acts 17:28, "For in him we live and move and have our being." And Jesus' words in John's Gospel, "God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." God's spirit is the medium within which his creation exists. Every subatomic particle within every atom of every living and non-living thing he created exists in him. But his spirit is distinctly different from his creation, so pantheism is incorrect. And the Spirit of God existed prior to his first creative act. Hence, panentheism is also wrong. This is why God is uniquely immanent, present within all of us, knowing every detail of our lives. But God is also transcendent. While he is immanently within us all, he is also immanently within the particles that form the rings of Saturn, and his transcendence goes far beyond the limits of our universe. After this brief introduction to God's omnipresent nature, I need to explain the primary definition of the word dimension. Properly understood, a spatial dimension is the extension of space in a given direction, with each subsequent dimension being perpendicular to any and all previous dimensions.
A single point has 0 dimensions, and a line segment has 1 dimension that we'll call length. We might place this line segment on an axis. Let's call it the x-axis. It only takes one number or coordinate to specify a location on this axis. A flat shape, such as a square or a circle, lives on a plane and has 2 dimensions that we might call length and width. The infinite plane it lives on is made from 2 perpendicular axes, the x and y axes. Any point on this plane can be described with a pair of xy coordinates. Now we can add a third axis, called the z-axis, that is at right angles to both the x and y axes, or to the xy plane itself. Now we can talk about solid objects that have volume, like cubes or spheres. It takes 3 coordinates, x, y, z, to describe a location in 3D space. Naturally, a 4th dimension requires 4 spatial coordinates, which means adding a new axis. We'll often refer to this as the w-axis, but the names are arbitrary. This axis has to be perpendicular to the other 3, something that is impossible with only 3 dimensions. In fact, this new axis is perpendicular to what we would think of as our 3D universe. That is what makes it so hard to conceptualize, as we don't have a physical reference for a 4th axis. Trying to conceptualize the 4th dimension necessarily means trying to imagine something that is beyond our physical universe. It challenges our basic understanding of space and geometry.
There are many cultural distortions of the concept of a dimension, such as movies suggesting the existence of beings from another dimension, as though a dimension is a place. But these are secondary uses of the word. I will always use the primary definition, the extension of space or time in a given direction, each subsequent dimension being perpendicular to all preceding dimensions. Now, as we turn our attention to the cosmological scale, the very large, I need to explain the trumpet diagram you have before you. But everything I'm sharing in this video has evidence to support it. I'll cite evidence not merely from the hard sciences as though they're the sole source of truth, but also from textual, historical, archaeological, personal, and even anecdotal sources when they're copiously corroborated. For this video, I tried to create a 3-dimensional view of 3 parallel Earths, namely the original paradise, our Earth, and hell as viewed along a negatively curved, anti-de Sitter 4th spatial dimensional axis. The only noticeable difference between each of these worlds is the force of gravity. If we look at God's original creation of this planet, he started with paradise, a 3-dimensional abode for the angels he created. We're told in the book of Job, a book many consider to be the earliest extant biblical work, in chapter 38, verses 4 through 7, that when the earth was created, the sons of God shouted for joy. Sons of God refers to the angelic host, actual physical beings who were created by a direct act of God. When 1/3 of the angels joined Satan in rebellion, God cast them down to our earth, to a parallel version of paradise that he'd also created that was plagued with a greater force of gravity than the original garden planet. This could have happened as long ago as 4.5 billion years if the current scientific estimate of the age of our Earth is accurate. This would mean that the immortal fallen angels had a much longer time to study this planet than humans ever had. When Satan successfully tempted Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God could not cast his image bearers down to the same place the fallen angels were, so Satan and his fallen angels were cast even further down into Hades, or Sheol in the Hebrew, the place we call hell, which has an even stronger force of gravity than we experience here. At that time, Adam and Eve were cast down from paradise to our earth, the same planet that the fallen angels now had become very familiar with. As we see in this video, these three versions of Earth have become superimposed upon one another because along the fourth spatial dimension, they're only separated by the bulk. This bulk is what Dr. Lisa Randall of Harvard University suggests is a mere 10 Planck length distance. For ease of understanding, I'll simply refer to this bulk, i.e. the space between parallelers, as less than a millimeter, but it's considerably less than a millimeter. To further clarify my model, I have ignored one of the basic dimensions in what I call the trumpet diagram. The rationale for this and the development of the diagram are laid out in the Foundations videos. This is my final version of the diagram. Every parallel universe is missing its dimension of width in the diagram and is represented as a flat disk. Our Earth is shown midway between a limited number of multiple universes. Gravity decreases to the left and increases to the right, with the other fundamental forces adapting within each parallel universe. Ancient texts such as Homer's Iliad tells us that Tartarus is as far below Hades as Hades is below our Earth. Hence its location is to the right of Hell, where it has even stronger gravity than Hell has, making it difficult, if not impossible, to leave once one is confined there. While God's Omniverse is larger than most people understand, it isn't nearly as large as the limitless multiverse espoused by vocal physicists like Drs. Sean Carroll of Caltech and Brian Greene of Columbia, among many others. This multiverse goes on in both directions and even branches according to some theorists. It is the multiverse model that has been adopted by most physicists. This model is the foundation for quantum computing and is just as deceptive a ploy of Satan as Darwinian evolution has ever been. God's omniverse is not limitless, extending in both directions infinitely, but rather a limited multiverse. It is limited by the distinct curvature of the fourth spatial dimension. If gravity is too strong, all the stars and galaxies implode, and if gravity is too weak, they fly apart and nothing holds together. This is the limiting factor of the negative curvature of anti-de Sitter space. We can clearly see three spatial dimensions around us, but the fourth dimension is truly hidden from us, which I believe is one result of the fall. I have to credit Dr. Lisa Randall of Harvard and Dr. Raman Sundrum of Johns Hopkins for helping me see this piece of the puzzle. In her 2006 book, Warped Passages, Dr. Randall presents the Randall-Sundrum model, or RS1. RS1 is a very respected model among theoretical physicists in which they posit the existence of a separate universe with stronger gravity that is parallel to ours along the negatively curved fourth spatial dimensional axis. However, without any biblical knowledge, she was ill-equipped to follow her model to its logical conclusions. The existence of nearby parallel universes along this fourth spatial dimensional axis explains even more biblically than it does scientifically. In chapter 20 of John's Gospel, we read that after his resurrection, Jesus came and stood among them on 2 separate occasions while the disciples were in a locked room. Scripture does not say that Jesus walked through a wall, though many have assumed that to be the case. That would have been movement along one of the 3 known spatial axes. But movement along the 4th dimensional axis better explains what occurred. Jesus came and stood among them. Jesus was freely able to move between paradise and our earth along this axis in his resurrected body. Since our bodies will resemble his once we are glorified, this points to the likelihood of more than one parallel heaven beyond paradise that we will need to learn to freely move between as well. Certain ancient texts support a view of multiple heavens as well. On the cross, Jesus told one of the thieves being crucified alongside him that today you will be with me in paradise. That statement can only be true if paradise actually existed at that time. He also promised his disciples and all of us in John 14 that I go to prepare a place for you. He did not say that at the end of days I will restore or renovate the earth and prepare a place for you in one fell swoop. He went 2,000 years ago to prepare that place. Many also preach that when we die, we will go to a partitioned section of Hades to await the Lord's return. This is based on an ancient Greek interpretation of Hades as the land of the dead. It was viewed as the realm of all the human dead without respect to their position with God. On God's Omniverse model, there are no gated communities in hell. When Christians die, they meet Jesus and are ushered into paradise by the elect angels and greeted by friends and loved ones who have gone before them. Gary Habermas, John Burke, and others can attest to this from thousands of people who claim near-death experiences.
We all agree that there is a very long history of life on this planet, tracing back about 4 billion years.
But in the beginning, that life was not human, but rather the fallen angelic host who were cast here from paradise due to their rebellion against the Most High God, as described in the book of Job. Imagine the depth of knowledge about this planet that the immortal fallen angels obtained over 4 billion years when compared to the mere 120 years max that we humans have here. At some time from between 6 and 20,000 years ago, when Satan successfully tempted Adam and Eve to sin, the first humans were cast down to our earth, while the fallen angels were cast even further down into Sheol. In the first verses of Genesis 6, we learn that the sons of God came back to our earth to take wives for themselves. This story was well known at the time, but is less known to us because it originated in the Book of the Watchers, the first 36 chapters of 1st Enoch. Enoch was not adopted into the biblical canon, but several first-century theologians thought it should have been, especially Tertullian. It was effectively lost for centuries, but it exists today, having been discovered in Ethiopia in 1773 and first translated into English in 1821. It was also found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and at the very least has historical significance.
Mount Hermon has always been considered by these ancient Near Eastern cultures, and even by the Romans and the Greeks, to be what we would call today an axis mundi, a gateway to another realm, or perhaps a portal to somewhere else, right? It's a cosmic mountain. This is the way that the Mesopotamians would have viewed Mount Hermon. It's a cosmic mountain. And so it was believed that there was a gate there to the netherworld. And part of this lore revolves around the Enochian tale. And I say part of it because the Greeks had their own reasons for believing that, and the Canaanites had their own reasons for believing it, but obviously the Hebrews believed that because of the Enochian tale, that the Watchers descended here. And it's not coincidental that it was upon the slopes of Hermon that Jesus transfigured before his disciples. And it's not coincidental that it was at the base of Hermon where he declared that the gates of hell would not prevail against his church. First Enoch relates an incredible story, a remarkable tale. And it turns out that this story lays the foundation for some of the most enigmatic references in the Old and New Testament. The story of First Enoch is foundational to Hebrew cosmology. And the story involves a company of 200 angels who the book of Enoch denominates watchers. So that when you get to Genesis 6, for example, and we read that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and took wives from among them, and then we see that the Nephilim result from this union, we know that the author is referencing the Enochian tale because it's already well known. The story is already widely disseminated. It's well known among the ancient Hebrews. That's why you have this referent in Genesis 6, this enigmatic reference to the sons of God, Nephilim, with no further explanation. There's no need for any further explanation. Everyone already knows what he's talking about, right? And so this is why also you get to the New Testament, you have Peter and Jude referencing those angels who sinned in the days of Noah. And as a consequence of their sin are now chained in gloomy darkness and Tartarus. That's a direct reference to the Enochian tale.
The second verse of 1 Enoch reads, Enoch, a righteous man whose eyes were opened by God, saw the vision of the Holy One in the heavens, which the messenger showed me, and from them I heard everything, and from them I understood as I saw, but not for this generation, but for a remote one which is to come. I'm convinced we're living in that remote generation right now. Another verse at the beginning of chapter 9 stood out to me. Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel looked down from heaven and saw much blood being shed upon the earth. And they said to one another, The earth made without inhabitant cries the voice of their crying up to the gates of heaven. God's original hope was for mankind to live with him in paradise and heaven, but he gave mankind free will. And being omniscient, he knew what would actually happen. So he created another earth made without inhabitant, our earth. The archangelic watchers needed to distinguish our earth, the one they were presently watching, from the one they were presently standing in, paradise. Hence the distinguishing phrase, made without inhabitant. What they were watching was the horrific result of 200 fallen angels having mated with human women and producing hybrids, giant offspring as suggested in Genesis 6. This was done in an attempt to corrupt the seed, the genetic lineage of mankind, to prevent the birth of the Messiah promised in Genesis 3:15. These giants, the Nephilim, gave birth to several generations of offspring, the Rephaim. They traveled to every continent on our earth, leaving telltale signs of their presence that still exist today.
The cataclysmic flood of Noah utterly annihilated the old world. It swept away its inhabitants and swept clean the artifacts of their civilization, their knowledge, and their technology. The only remaining vestiges of that age of corruption, the so-called Golden Age, are the megaliths. The term megalith refers to prehistoric edifices constructed with immensely large stones. The ruined foundations of these megaliths, still standing like fleshless bones after thousands of years of inundation and weathering, bear witness to the builder gods of the pre-flood world, their hybrid offspring, and their celestial knowledge.
There exists a vast network of megaliths all over the planet, some of which are well known, like Baalbek in Lebanon and Stonehenge in England, while many others, such as the Bosnian Pyramid and the recently discovered megaliths in Siberia, have not even been officially acknowledged as artificial structures yet, because their unfathomable size absolutely demolishes the conventional paradigms of anthropology.
Not only are there megalithic ruins dispersed over every continent on the surface of the earth, many megalithic structures, like the Shinkana, are buried under the ground and sunken beneath the oceans. This is a worldwide phenomenon that is much more widespread and significant than anyone even realizes.
Many of the megaliths built by these giants were uniquely astronomically aligned.
120 years ago, sponge divers discovered a shipwreck off the tiny island of Antikythera in Greece. And what they found changed our understanding of human history forever. What looked to be a hunk of corroded metal that no one knew quite what to do with.
It was not recognised at all as being anything interesting when it was discovered. It was just a corroded lump about the size of a large dictionary.
But when, in 1902, it was discovered that there were gear wheels inside it, everyone suddenly got rather excited.
This was the first shock because anything from ancient Greece simply shouldn't have gear wheels. These were precision gears with teeth about 1 millimetre long. And this was just completely shocking.
And the Antikythera Mechanism has captured the imagination of archaeologists, mathematicians and scientists ever since.
It's a dedicated calculating machine, and it uses bronze gear wheels to calculate the cycles of the cosmos being the sun, the moon, the planets, against the stars. You can wind it forward 10 years, and you can know where the sun and the moon is going to be and where the planets are going to be.
The History Channel presented an episode of America Unearthed that dealt with America's Stonehenge. You may be unaware that we have a Stonehenge here in Salem, New Hampshire. Kelsey Stone, the son of its owner Dennis Stone, traced the summer solstice line on Google Earth on his computer. I did the same thing on my iPad where these photos came from. Kelsey started in New Hampshire, saw that the line ran through the central trilithon of Stonehenge in England, and if you follow it further, ended in Beirut, Lebanon. However, not knowing the biblical and Enochian narratives, they didn't see the real endpoint, Mount Hermon. It seems that each Stonehenge was a Nephilim or Rephaim built road sign pointing back to the home of their fathers, and they were very likely built using an archaeoastronomical device such as the Antikythera Mechanism. When I fully realized the extent of the violence, depravity, and pure evil the fallen angels had released upon our earth prior to the flood of Noah, it caused me to experience a deep sense of compassion for someone I'd never expected to feel this way toward. It caused me to empathize and feel deep compassion for God himself. He loves us so much that he had to do the unthinkable to save us from what ultimately was caused by the sins of the fallen angels. Each human being is created to be exactly what God intended him or her to be, and we should be abundantly and profoundly thankful for that truth. Moving ahead in time several millennia, we come to the early days of America.
Thanks for tuning in. This is from Rick. And the subject is giants. Buffalo Bill's account of Pawnee Indians finding giant bones while out on an expedition. An account of finding giants' bones from Buffalo Bill's book. The Life of Honorable William F. Cody, known as Buffalo Bill, the famous hunter, scout, and guide. An autobiography, sorry about that, pages 267, 268. While we were in the Sand Hills scouting in the Niobrara County, the Pawnee Indians brought into camp one night some very large bones, one of which a surgeon of the expedition pronounced to be the thigh bone of a human being. Let me stop right there. When you look at a thigh bone, that's called the femur. You can ascertain the height of the person from the length of the femur. So a normal human femur, 18, 22 inches, somewhere in that. You start getting femurs that are 30 inches, now you're looking at a giant. The Indians claim that the bones they had found were those of a person belonging to a race of people who a long time ago lived in this country, that there was once a race of men on the earth whose size was about 3 times that of an ordinary man, 15 feet tall. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards. And this, of course, is where it gets into the elongated skulls. So is this genetic? Some people will say, oh, it's not genetic. This is the result of cranial deformation. We had an optometrist look at these. The orbits are about 25% larger than a normal human beings. But here's the kicker, and I've talked about this before. The foramen magnum, which is the connecting point of the spinal column to the base of the skull, is all the way to the occipital plate. You can't do that. You can't bind the head of a child and move the foramen magnum. The foramen magnum should be in the center, right here, of the skull.
Take a look at these two skulls. A normal human skull on the left, and what L.A. Marzulli claims to be a Nephilim skull on the right. There is no room in the Nephilim skull for the cerebellum. Why does this matter? Anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff and physics Nobel laureate Roger Penrose offer their insights.
I got interested in microtubules in medical school and studying mitosis in a cancer lab, where these mitotic spindles, which are microtubules, pull apart the chromosomes in a very highly orchestrated dance to get exact separation of duplicate pairs of chromosomes that go on to each becomes the daughter cell. And if that isn't perfect, then you can get a cancer, you can get maldevelopment, and so forth. And so everybody else in the lab got really interested in the chromosomes, being the dawn of the genetic revolution and so forth in the early 70s. But for some reason, I got fascinated with these structures which seemed to know where to go and what to do. It seemed to have some kind of intelligence. And I had been interested in consciousness from my undergraduate days. And so I wondered whether these structures, which turned out to be microtubules, might be processing information. And I was primarily interested in the brain and thought that they might support processes inside neurons leading to consciousness.
You see, what you need in order for this kind of scheme to work, you need some isolation, so you can get your quantum degrees of freedom don't get sort of spread out through the brain as it would be. If it was just nerve propagation, then there are these electromagnetic fields which spread out, and they simply do what's called decohere, and you just lose everything. So you need something which has the hope of preserving these degrees of freedom, these quantum mechanical degrees of freedom. And the microtubules looked to me the best thing I'd ever seen as a possibility for doing this. I think we still have to work hard to and I think they're not any old microtubules, that they have to be organized right, and they have to do something like, I knew various things about the brain. For example, that the cerebellum, which has, well, as I now know, more neurons in it than the cerebrum. I didn't know at the time. I think they didn't have the numbers right then, but I certainly they were comparable. Whereas the cerebrum, where our sort of conscious thoughts seem to be connected with, the cerebellum, it seems to be pretty well unconscious. Yet it's got all these neurons, and why are they not being conscious?
Right.
Stuart comes up with now what I think is a much better understanding of what the difference could be, and that is these cells called pyramidal cells, which are simply not present in the cerebellum. And this is the first time I've heard of something where you see a key difference and where the cerebellum doesn't have these things, and that would explain why it's not conscious.
Remember, the Nephilim were the results of the fallen angels' sin in their attempt to corrupt the genetics of humanity by mating with human women. The Nephilim and their progeny were never meant to exist. They were conscious, but they lacked a soul. This would imply that the cerebellum is the seat, not of consciousness, but of the soul. In the 1990s, Penrose and Hameroff suggested a process called orchestrated objective reduction, or ORC-OR, in which quantum entanglement occurs in microtubules within the axons of neurons of the cerebellum. They weren't taken seriously at the time because no one could imagine that quantum processes could occur in as soft and squishy a place as the brain. Yet since then, scientists have discovered that quantum processes increase efficiency in photosynthesis, which occurs in all plants. And plants are among the earliest forms of life to exist according to any paradigm.
Intricate dance of nature, where sunlight fuels life itself, plants perform a miraculous feat known as photosynthesis. This process, fundamental to the survival of ecosystems, involves transforming light energy into chemical energy. But there's more to photosynthesis than meets the eye. It harnesses not just the power of the sun, but the peculiar principles of quantum mechanics. At the heart of this process are the chloroplasts, tiny structures within plant cells where pigments like chlorophyll capture sunlight. The energy absorbed isn't just shuffled around in a straightforward manner. Instead, it participates in a complex and highly efficient series of reactions, facilitated by a phenomenon known as quantum coherence. This means that particles like electrons and photons exist in multiple states at once, leading to a kind of synchronized oscillation that enhances energy transfer. For decades, scientists believed that the warm, wet environment of biological systems would be too chaotic for delicate quantum phenomena, which typically require extremely cold temperatures to avoid decoherence. However, groundbreaking research in the early 21st century provided compelling evidence to the contrary. Studies showed that during photosynthesis, energy is not just transferred, but done so through a coherent quantum process. This revelation was not only a testament to the sophistication of nature, but also piqued the interest of technologists and engineers. The principle of quantum coherence in photosynthesis doesn't just explain how plants achieve near-perfect efficiency under optimal conditions. It also offers a blueprint for revolutionary solar technologies. By mimicking the way plants optimize light harvesting, scientists are exploring new methods to enhance the efficiency of solar panels.
Quantum entanglement requires isolation to avoid decoherence. The pyramidal cells in the cerebrum actually create decoherence. But in the cerebellum, there are no pyramidal cells, and they have many more neurons with isolating microtubules. It's the only place in the brain where quantum entanglement can occur. Penrose and Hameroff suggest that OR accounts for subconscious activity, such as what one observes in the performance of a master pianist who seems to play without conscious thought. But I believe the cerebellum plays a much more important role than merely subconscious thought.
I want you to comment on this slide, if you can, Dr. Egnor. You said this: the brain is the organ of movement, perception, memory, and emotion. There is no organ of intellect and will. Please comment on that.
Yes, and it's as you mentioned, it's a really nice synopsis. First of all, it's a nice synopsis of Thomistic psychology. It's of St. Thomas's understanding of the soul, and neuroscience really demonstrates it. The brain is an organ just like any other organ. That is, the heart has a job, it pumps blood. The kidneys have a job, they make urine. Every organ does its thing. The brain's an organ, it's a piece of meat. And it really has five things. One thing it does is it regulates homeostasis, meaning it keeps our blood pressure normal, keeps our heartbeat normal, stuff like that. It allows us to move. It allows us to have sensations. It allows us to have memories, and it allows us to have emotions. But the neuroscience makes it very clear, I think, that intellect, the capacity for reasoning, for abstract thought, and free will don't come from the brain. They don't come from any meat. They're not from an organ. They're powers of our soul. But those powers of our soul are immaterial, and because they're immaterial, they're spiritual.
At the beginning of this video, I explained what it means to say God is spirit. However, we often use the term spiritual to describe anything that exists outside or beyond our three-dimensional universe. We call angels spiritual when they're actually physical, corporeal beings that exist alongside us on parallel Earths that are less than a millimeter away. Let that sink in. The quantum entanglement that occurs in neurons of the cerebellum allows for communication between our three-dimensional bodies and the fourth-dimensional extension of ourselves, our soul. So in one sense, I agree with Dr. Egnor that the soul is spiritual and it allows for the intellect and free will. However, I do believe that when one considers the cerebrum as a separate entity or organ from the cerebellum, we can see that God has distinct purposes in mind for each of them. When I claim that the soul is the fourth dimensional extension of ourselves, I am saying that there's a physical component to our existence that is outside our 3D universe, that houses the immaterial information typically thought of as the soul. So in one sense, the soul is the immaterial information, but in another sense, it does have a bodily container that's not materially visible in our 3D universe. In Matthew 10:28, Jesus tells us not to fear those who can kill the body but not the soul, but rather to fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Consider Dr. J.P. Moreland's brief comparison between Cartesian and Thomistic dualism.
What is your view of the soul-body relationship? If you are a Cartesian, that you follow Descartes, then the body and the soul are relatively independent. The soul could exist without the body, and the body could exist without the soul. The only relationship between the two is a cause-effect relationship. If when I will for an arm to go up, my arm goes up, and when my arm gets stuck with a pin, I feel the pain. If you're a Thomistic dualist, which is what I am, then the body depends upon the soul, and the soul is what grounds and forms the body and makes it what it is. So if you take the soul away from the body, it's no longer a body, but a corpse.
If we're strictly speaking of humans, made in God's image, Thomistic dualism makes the most sense. But if we consider the soulless Nephilim, they had consciousness, but no soul. So the Thomistic idea that the soul is necessary for life fails with respect to them. Consider these images of a CAT scan. They're parallel two-dimensional slices through the brain of a three-dimensional patient with a brain tumor. Each slice looks different because it shows a different slice of the whole patient. In a similar manner, we may very well be three-dimensional slices of a four-dimensional human. Now, this is only speculation, but suppose the process of aging is actually a slow progression through the entirety of our four-dimensional reality. I don't believe we were ever intended to live as four-dimensional beings. At any given time, we will be three-dimensional, as we're accustomed to, but we may have the ability to appear as others remember us by moving along the fourth dimensional extension of ourselves. This would explain why people who are closely acquainted with Jesus failed to recognize him along the road to Emmaus, or Mary in front of the open tomb. There's evidence for this from copiously corroborated anecdotal reports. Though this evidence may be more appropriately considered circumstantial evidence, I think it warrants some deep thought.
So here comes this welcoming committee, and one of the people is Vicky's grandmother, who had died previously, and two of her close friends, Debbie and Diane. They were 9 and 11 years old when they died. They lived with her in the house, with a house mother. They had significant other problems when they were alive, but Vicky said they were healthy and in their prime. Now, interestingly, that's another commonality all around the globe, is that people are commonly, they say everyone is about 30, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Now, another commonality is that people can appear to us at the age we last remember them. So it's kind of like they can choose to appear to us as we would feel most, I guess, reminiscent with them. But the majority of people appear in their prime. I don't know, 29 was a good year for me, so I'm okay with that.
People we meet in paradise, whom we knew on our earth at a young age, like my best friend Kelly at age 4, who died of leukemia at age 5, wouldn't recognize an older version of me. Neither would my friends when I was age 10. As you can see, unlike Frank, I've changed dramatically as I've aged, yet we will likely be able to appear to others so as to be recognized by them. As for being 29 in heaven, I'm good with that too.